Good evening, YouTube, and welcome to the Pipe Report. This is the second time I'm doing this video. The first time my microphone wasn't actually recording, so yeah, it sucks. Anyways, so inflation is coming, and when I was working at a job a couple years ago, it was a pretty good job, paid very well. I was going to buy a lot of gold. I was going to buy like $5,000 worth of gold, but I didn't. And I really wish that I did. They say you're supposed to have about 1/3 of your total assets in gold, just to be safe, because gold has intrinsic value. It has inherent worth, unlike fiat currency. Fiat currency, every nation in history that has ever adopted fiat currency as its economic modality has always failed, has always been destroyed, has always collapsed. But gold has been around forever, and it will continue to go around forever. Okay. Anyways, oh yeah, same as Bitcoin. I do a lot of online gambling, and most banks in the US don't allow you to actually gamble online. So you can buy Bitcoin, or there's other ways around it. I won't say what I did, but it was perfectly legal, but I did other ways around it. I really wish I did Bitcoin, though, because if I would have won what I won last year betting on football, and I won that in Bitcoin instead of dollars, well, things would be looking good right now for me. But anyways, I digress. Inflation is coming. It's taken 7 years of ZIRP and over $4 trillion in QE, but the Federal Reserve has finally begun to unleash inflation. ZIRP is zero interest rate policy, and most people, they argue that because the Federal Reserve has had interest rates so low for so long at 0%, that is why we're never getting out of recession. The purpose of lowering the interest rate to zero is to incentivize more people to invest, more people to borrow money, etc., but it never really works out the way it does. QE is quantitative easing, and that is essentially the Federal Reserve buys government-backed securities to increase the money supply. So how do they do this? Well, a government security essentially is government bonds. It's an IOU. It is a promise of debt remittance. Basically, it's an IOU that the federal government will pay you back on a certain day. So treasury bonds, savings bonds, those are government-backed securities. And the credit or the guarantee that the U.S. will pay them back is the only thing that makes those bonds valuable. So that's important to know. But anyways, you're probably wondering, yeah, but how does buying government bonds increase the money supply? Well, I talked about this a few different times in a few different videos. For every dollar of federal bonds that the Federal Reserve buys from the U.S., they are allowed to create an additional $9, to which they give to commercial banks and economic institutions so they can loan out to individuals and businesses. And then those banks can also, commercial banks, then can also use fractional reserve lending and increase the money supply even more. So think government bonds. Whenever the Fed buys government bonds, they are increasing the money supply. It won't show up in official inflation measures like the CPI for a while, and this is intentional. The Fed knows that CPI doesn't measure real inflation. How do we know this? The Fed itself published a paper back in 2002 admitting its official measures of inflation do a horrible job of predicting future inflation. The paper received almost no publicity for the obvious reason that it would reveal that the Fed's whole emphasis on CPI and other official measure of inflation were a massive scam. So what does predict future inflation accurately? Food prices. We see that past inflation in food prices has been a better forecaster of future inflation than has the popular core measure. Comparing the past year's inflation in food prices to the prices of other components that comprise the PCEPI, we find that the food component still ranks the best among them all. I want you to focus on these two admissions. The Fed has admitted that its official inflation measures do not accurately predict future inflation. The Fed admitted that food prices are a much better predictor of future inflation. In fact, food prices were a better predictor of inflation than the Fed's PCE, non-durable goods, transportation services, housing, clothing, energy, and more. PCE, I believe, stands for personal consumption expenditures, and the definition of that is essentially the name, personal consumption, what you spend, what you consume. Put simply, if you want to predict inflation, well, you need to look at food prices. The process of tracking food prices begins with agricultural commodity prices like wheat, soybeans, lean hogs, etc., etc. With that in mind, agricultural commodity prices look to be bottoming/breaking out of a massive falling wedge pattern that has been developing over the last 6 years. Here's the graph of that. This chart is extraordinarily bullish with an upside target of 26 to 28. And when this hits, agriculture prices will spike, unleashing the first wave of an inflation tsunami. And that's why gold will be valuable during this, because when inflation happens, the price of gold goes up. Because, like I said, gold has inherent worth. Gold has value. I mean, all in history, countries that use fiat currency have all collapsed. But gold has been around forever. So I recommend definitely investing in gold if you haven't. And feel free to send me a bar or two. Hint, hint. The US dollar has already picked up on this, dropping hard against every major world currency thus far in 2017. Here's some graphs, US to the euro, etc., etc. Put simply, inflation is coming, and you're not taking steps to actively profit from this. It's time to get a move on. So this last few part here looks like they're trying to sell you gold, no doubt, because they're going to get a profit off it. And although they are advertising it to essentially help them increase their profit, that doesn't mean it isn't true. That doesn't mean that buying gold is a bad idea, because it would be a good idea. Inflation is the worst tax of all. Most people don't think of inflation as a tax, but it is a tax. Inflation devalues the dollar, making prices go higher. So essentially, all these government programs you are paying for, you are paying it through the tax of inflation. And as I stated many times before, poor people suffer the worst from inflation, strictly due to attrition. They don't have the money that rich people have. Rich people are rich, so when their dollar devalues, they don't suffer as much as poor people do. Those poor people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they suffer the most. So inflation is coming. Buy gold if you can. Either way, this comes down to our banking system and our economic modality in general. It would be nice to go to Austrian economics to get back on the gold standard. I was kind of for debt-free money, I'll be honest, because that doesn't sound like a bad idea. I mean, there are benefits to fiat currency, but there are also a lot of dangerous ramifications that can procure itself from using fiat currency. So although debt-free money does sound good because we can pay off our national debt in no time, to have a safe, sound currency would be better in the long run. And that's where gold comes in, or other commodities, other special metals, and things of that nature. So we will see what happens. Inflation is coming though, so expect your total net worth to be less than what it was after inflation comes. Because even though you have the same amount of money in your pockets, you will actually have less money than you did, strictly due to the worst tax of all, inflation. And I'm done.